Good morning good morning and welcome to the 33rd meeting of the Social Justice and Social Security Committee. We have no apologies this morning, and our first item of business for today is a decision to take agenda items 3 and 4 in private. Are we all agreed? Okay, thank you. So our next item is our final evidence session on the post-legislative scrutiny of the Child Poverty Scotland Act 2017. So in the last 2 weeks, we've heard from a panel focusing on the impact of the Act on local policy and delivery, and a panel of national organisations, including those who called for the statutory targets to be created. So today we are going to hear from the Scottish Government, and I very much welcome Shirley-Anne Somerville, Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice, and I also welcome her officials, Anne Mackenzie, Unit Head, Tackling Child Poverty Policy Unit, and Andrew Fraser, Child Poverty Briefing and Strategy Team Leader, Scottish Government. So thank you all for joining us today. And Cabinet Secretary, I believe that you want to make an opening statement.
Thank you very much and good morning, Convener. I'm pleased to be here today to give evidence as part of the committee's post-legislative scrutiny. This is a very important part of the committee's work and the Parliament's work, and I look forward to reading the recommendations in due course. Ending child poverty is the foremost priority of the Scottish Government and of the First Minister, and I look forward to setting out today some of the impacts that the Act has had in driving this mission forward since it was passed. I'm heartened that throughout the evidence the committee has seen and heard up to this point, there is wide agreement that the impact of the Act has been positive. Positive in focusing efforts and investment on tackling child poverty, in ensuring that child poverty reduction remains a high priority in all sectors, in fostering collaboration between organisations at a local level, and in driving delivery of policies that serve to support people in poverty across Scotland. The passing of the Act has led to a sharpened and intense focus on child poverty within the Scottish Government, and has helped to shape policy in the way we deliver employability support, childcare, transport and a host of other policies spanning all ministers and portfolios. Ministers have collaborated more and more closely over this time, culminating in the recent formation of a Cabinet subcommittee on child poverty. This has elevated our oversight arrangements and further strengthened our approach. It builds on learning from the actions we have already taken and will create more opportunities to coordinate policies and maximise our collective impact on child poverty. This is essential as the scale and nature of the challenges we face have changed dramatically since 2017 as a result of COVID, the cost of living crisis and other global events. I've spoken to the committee many times previously about our transformation of social security provision in Scotland, establishing a radically different system based on dignity, fairness and respect. The Act has been an important impetus for some of this work, and the Scottish Child Payment is an example of a policy that was designed and delivered with the clear ambition of reducing child poverty and which is now delivering crucial support for families. Scottish Government modelling from February this year suggests that the Scottish Child Payment will keep 60,000 children out of relative poverty in 24-25, and in total it is estimated that the Scottish Government policies will keep 100,000 children out of relative poverty in that time, with relative poverty levels 10 percentage points lower than they would otherwise have been. I was also glad to hear in evidence given to committee how policies implemented at the local level are also bringing critical support to families, and how the Act has transformed the way that national and local governments, third sector organisations and indeed all our partners are in this national mission engaged together with each other to drive forward progress and create a fairer, more equal Scotland. This is the collective approach that was envisioned for the Act right from the beginning, and I hope through this inquiry the impact of the Act has been clear for members to see. In closing, Convener, much has been achieved since the Act was introduced, but we know collectively that there is still so much more to do to improve the lives of those families still experiencing poverty, and I'm very grateful for the time with the committee today to be able to discuss those further. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you for that opening statement, Cabinet Secretary. And I'm just going to go straight into questions in relation to the Government's policy choices. So can you maybe explain and let us know how the statutory framework affected the Scottish Government's policy choices, and what would you have done differently under a non-statutory approach?
Well, I think it's quite difficult to think what we could have done had the Act not been in place, because it has now been in place for so long and it's such an integral way that we work now. But as people have already heard from other witnesses before the committee, I do think it's really driven a greater focus for delivery and increased investment in this area. And I would say that's both at a national and a local level as well. That ability for us to have that focus on delivery, on accountability, has really assisted, I think, the government to be able to work collaboratively across the Scottish Government, but also with local government, third sector partners, health boards and so on, to be able to work with a shared understanding of that national mission. So there's a number of policies that have clearly came from that. I mentioned the Scottish Child Payment earlier. We've got our focus on no one left behind through employability, which has really been part of that work of government working right across our different portfolios to see what could be done, particularly with reference to the 6 priority families. So while it's difficult to know what it would have been like had the Act not been in place, it's certainly, I know that the Act, with it being in place, has allowed us to just continue that focus and continue that drive. And it made it easier for people to hold government and other agencies to account on that too.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And how have the changes made by Parliament, such as inclusion of interim targets, affected the Scottish Government's approach as well?
Well, I think it's, again, assisted with that drive and that accountability. The interim targets, for example, is an important aspect that was driven through and as the bill progressed. And in essence, I suppose, as we would hope with all legislation, I think that the Stage 2 and Stage 3 amendments and how the bill developed really strengthened the bill. The interim targets is an obvious one, but there are others. And that focus on the targets and the focus on local and national, the focus on the 6 priority families, has really assisted all levels of government as they look to then implement and actually meet those targets. The other aspect I would say that has been important is to base what's happening on evidence. So looking at the impact of policies and looking at how we could share best practice as well. And I think the development of the bill has helped us develop that type of implementation.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm now going to bring in Jeremy Balfour. Thank you.
Thank you, Mina. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary, and good morning to your team. Obviously, a lot of the things that you brought forward have had cross-party support, which is, obviously very welcome. But there is the looming deficit in regard to the social security budget, which has been driven by the choices the government and this Parliament have made. And obviously, we don't want that funding to suddenly all come to an end. But I wonder what thinking is your department, along with the other ministers within the Cabinet, in regard to how will we bridge this deficit of over £1 billion within a few years' time?
So I would take a very different look to that. So we do not have a deficit. The Scottish Government cannot run a budget at deficit. We must balance our budget every year. What we have done is taken choices, political choices, to invest in social security. So when you look at the £1.1 billion investment that we have made over our block grant adjustment, just under £500 million worth of that is for the Scottish Child Payment. There is additional support also in terms of the benefits which are not available elsewhere in the UK, like the Young Carers Grant, for example. And those are important investments that we've made. Clearly, as we come to every budget, we have to look at the choices that the government has taken and ensure overall that is we have a balanced budget, and the choices that we take to support low-income families, to support carers and to support disabled people, it is a choice. But I would disagree and say that it's an investment, not a deficit.
Oh, I'm happy to use that word. But if that investment comes, and you're absolutely right, the budget has to be balanced, for my basic economics, which are basic, there are two choices. We either then have to raise more income by raising tax, or we have to cut a budget from another department. And so I'm just wondering again, whatever word we want to use, investment, but that investment comes either with raising taxes or by cutting some other budget, or is there a magic wand that I've not quite worked out?
Well, I wish there was, Mr Balfour, I wish there was. But yes, the choices that we take to mitigate against certain aspects of UK government policy at this point amount to £134 million per year. The choice for the Scottish Government to continue to mitigate against the bedroom tax, the benefit cap, and clearly from the announcements yesterday to also mitigate against the two-child cap, it will mean that that is money that we could have been spending elsewhere, either on anti-poverty measures or indeed elsewhere in the budget, on education, on the NHS. We can all pick areas that we may wish to see that investment. The easiest way for the Scottish Government to be able to have that money to use in a different ways is obviously for the UK Government to take the decisions at a UK level that doesn't require us to mitigate that and actually deal with the bedroom tax, the benefit cap and the two-child clause at source. And yes, then that money could be freed up and then we could get into a debate. I think I may still disagree with Mr Balfour about how that money might be spent, but that would be a discussion that we could get into at that point.
Another day.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm now going to invite Liz Smith in. Thanks.
Just a quick follow-up to that, Cabinet Secretary. The Scottish Fiscal Commission projections stated that there would be an uplift of around the £580 million between this financial year and next financial year. But in the Cabinet Secretary's budget statement, the projection for social security spend has gone up to £800 million. That is a huge difference. And I just wondered if you could comment on how that is going to be funded.
If you forgive me, Convener, I haven't came today with the details for the budget, but I'm happy to be able to assist either in writing or I'm presuming I may be invited back to discuss the budget in detail. But what we do need to look at, for example, is the aspects where the level of expenditure by the Scottish Government in social security goes up each year. And then look at how much is covered by a block grant adjustment. So the level of social security spend may go up. Some of that will be covered by in-year block grant adjustments because actually we're seeing an increase in DWP expenditure as well. So I think it would be easier if we could deal with this in detail with those different types of expenditure laid out, because sometimes the two, and I'm not saying Liz Smith is doing it at the moment, but sometimes those two can be conflated, and I think it's important that we look at that in the round.
I'm content for you to come back and comment I think it will be in the new year anyway. You'll be invited back and to discuss the budget, and we've got the Scottish Fiscal Commission.
I do want to relate this to the child poverty issue, because as you rightly say, Cabinet Secretary, the Scottish Government struck that as a very key priority. And what I'm interested in is when the comparison is made between what the Scottish Government's projections are, which obviously are built in with that child poverty priority in mind, they are completely out of step with what the Scottish Fiscal Commission's projections are. And I think the key question for the Scottish Government is to be able to answer where that money is coming from. Because if we are going to tackle child poverty, we obviously have to have the money available to do that. And I'm just interested in the discrepancy between what the Scottish Government's figures are and what the Scottish Fiscal Commission projected.
And I'm happy to provide that in writing, convener, when we're actually discussing the budget, because I think I could, I hope, easily be able to reassure Liz Smith that we work very closely with the Scottish Fiscal Commission on these issues, and I would be happy to discuss those when we're here to discuss the budget.
Okay, thanks very much. And we do have the Scottish Fiscal Commission in on the 19th of December. We'll get the opportunity to look at their forecasting. So thank you. I'm going to move now on to Katie Clark. Thank you.
Very much, and good morning, Cabinet Secretary. In what ways has the Act helped ensure effective work to tackle child poverty across all policy areas within the Scottish Government? And are there any particular policy areas which have been more challenging to include in the cross-government approach?
Well, I mentioned, I think, in my opening remarks around the Cabinet Subcommittee that we now have the First Minister chaired the first meeting of that a few months ago, and that sets an important groundwork about how the First Minister wants to deal with that. Even before we had the Cabinet Subcommittee, we did work across portfolios and had meetings across portfolios at ministerial level on that, and we also importantly have the programme board that looks at the work that's going on within Best Start Bright Futures. Those are important governance areas that allows everyone to come together. It's at an official level, and ministers and officials to be able to look at that. And in essence, what that really ensures every Cabinet Secretary has their mind focused on is this isn't just my job as the Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice, but it's the Cabinet Secretary for Transport's job. It's within education. It's right across government. And that allows us to have those cross-cutting discussions, and also about a change in policy in one portfolio perhaps having an impact on another portfolio. And that's exceptionally important. The other area where I suppose it's maybe more challenging, because we just need to make sure that we're working in different ways, is also cross-government. So how does national government work with local government? How does national local governments work with health boards, third sector organisations? So it's not, I suppose that the challenge is for us all at different levels of government to be working together. Now, that obviously requires local authorities to have a great deal of discretion about what they wish and should be doing in their own local area. But how do we assist each other in that process? You've seen some of that work particularly developing with the First Minister's drive to have whole family support, the extension of Fairer Futures partnerships, for example, that was announced in the programme for government. So all of those aspects that we're continuing to bring in are again different ways of making sure it's not just across the Scottish Government, but across all levels of government as well.
Mm-hmm. And are there any particular policy areas that have been challenging that you can maybe point to?
I think it's again about ensuring that all levels of government are working together. So there are obviously areas where the Scottish Government has a focus and it is devolved, but perhaps the delivery of that is at a local authority level. So that may be education. There's a myriad of different ways how employability schemes will work. And it's that ability for us to make sure that that national mission and the national policy also fits with what needs to work in a local level. And we may have different variations of that, and we should have different variations of that across different councils. Those are probably some of the more challenging areas. but I think it's something that we're seeing a great deal of progress on, and the work that's been done by the Pathfinder initiatives, for example, in Glasgow and Dundee, and also the work that's been going on in Clackmannanshire, show that linkages working effectively well. We're developing that still further with the Fairer Futures partnerships and hoping to see that build on even more councils perhaps coming into that, and that's the real development that we want to continue, and it's working out how we can best support each other. I think is challenging, and there's a lot to learn, but that's exactly why we had the Pathfinders, and we're now moving forward with the partnerships.
Thank you.
That's lovely, thank you. I'm now going to invite Bob Doris, who's joining us online. So over to you, Bob. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. I want to talk about action at a local level, because what we're doing is scrutinising the Child Poverty Act and how it is driven change at a local level. We had some good positive evidence in the last few weeks that it has done, but what is the Scottish Government's position? To what extent does the Cabinet Secretary think the Child Poverty Act has driven that change, and how is that change monitored?
So I've touched on that a little bit in my answers to Katie Clark, but I think, and also I know the committee's heard evidence about how that local reporting duty has again strengthened that focus on child poverty across local areas. I think that has led to new innovative action. Clearly there's a great deal that local authorities have always done that assists in tackling child poverty, but we're obviously seeing a renewed focus on that. It is important that local authorities have a great deal of flexibility in what they do. I think that is exceptionally important. So it's how we can assist through the non-statutory guidance, for example, that was recently refreshed to be able to provide that guidance, and also to work with national partners again to be able to support local authorities. I touched already on the work that's going on in Clacks, Dundee and Glasgow. I think that is some exceptionally important work that's happening. It's by no means the only good practice, good work that's happening out there, I would hasten to add. But that is very important work that's happening, and we are keen to then take that learning and assist those councils in taking that learning forward. The work of the Improvement Service is key to this, to be able to share that good practice. The Poverty Alliance also is given ongoing support from the Scottish Government to again assist with that type of work. And as we look to the local child poverty action reports, I think you see a development over time on these, to see local authorities now taking an increasingly strategic, preventative approach in what's going on there, and that's to be welcomed. But again, I would stress the point that we're keen to ensure that those reports are what the councils think should be being delivered and set out in a way that's right for them. But the focus that's on the reporting duties and the focus about what's in those local plans supported by the Act, I do think will be making a difference to policy changes at a local level, just as it inevitably has done at a national level.
Okay, that's helpful. Convener, I'm just going to ask a couple of mop-up questions, because the Cabinet Secretary strayed into some further lines of question I was going to ask. Anyway, there was a suggestion last week that those local child poverty action reports are very important, but that more detailed guidance would be helpful. I know you spoke earlier about refreshed guidance. I don't know if you were talking about in relation to those local child poverty action reports, but normally we hear about less reporting requirements. It's quite refreshing to hear organisations and authorities say the reporting requirements really help drive change, but potentially more detailed guidance in relation to that. And the Cabinet Secretary also mentioned the Pathfinder initiatives. Glasgow, for example, I know was involved in a kind of no wrong door initiative with the funds they're receiving. How do we share best practice? So if something works in Glasgow, it wouldn't necessarily work in Dundee, but there could be a kernel of an idea that could be picked up and developed elsewhere in the country. So a bit more about the guidance for those that reporting, and a bit more about how we identify what works and adapt it to elsewhere in the country.
So I do think there is a balance that needs to be struck in terms of what's happening in local areas. That ability to have quite a degree of flexibility in how to report is very important, because I do think councils need to be responsive to local circumstances. And we'll need to think and be conscious about the fact that more detailed guidance might run counter to that. So I'm caught by the fact that often before committee or in Parliament we're being encouraged to not dictate or drive a certain direction or way of reporting in great detail that becomes overburdensome to local authorities. So there is that balance to strike. In saying that, I did mention that we've just not long refreshed the guidance in 2022. I'm quite content to keep that under review should people wish. Should the committee have a recommendation that we look at that again with our local authority partners, of course, and I would seek their views on it as well, because the guidance should be a tool for improvement rather than ever getting in the way of what's happening. There is a lot of discretion in those reports, and I think that's important, because there's also a great deal of other strategic reports that local authorities have to do, whether that's children's services plans and whatnot. So how those plans all link together, I think it's important to have that flexibility. There's a great deal of work that can go on through the improvement service, through the peer support network within that, to look at what works and information sharing. The National Partners Group is another very important mechanism to allow support for local authorities, discussion from what's happening in local reports. Again, that's another important area, both for national and local government to have that connection. But I would stress the work of the improvement service as part of that, because it is really important about what works. We're also mindful, as we look to move forward with the Fairer Futures partnership, about how we share that work as well, not by duplicating the system that's already in place for sharing good practice, but if there's work coming from the Fairer Futures partnerships, then how do we encourage more local authorities to join with that work, or to continue that maybe under another guise, for example. So that learning is exceptionally important.
Okay, thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, thank you. I'm now going to invite Marie McNair. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Cabinet Secretary and your officials. I'm going to kind of stay on the same theme. Wanted to know what kind of feedback do local authorities receive in their local child poverty action reports? Is it automatic, or do they only get it if they ask for it?
So each report's reviewed by the members of the National Partners Group that I've mentioned previously, with feedback offered to local areas. They can support how the future plans could be improved. The national partners proactively offer a feedback meeting to local areas as well, following the review of their report, with written feedback available on request. So I do think there is a feedback mechanism in there. Whether that's taken up or not is a matter for local authorities about what they want to do with those offers, and then what they do with what's in the feedback. But that is a matter for them. But there is that ability, certainly, to have that discussion. And that allows, I hope, a level of reassurance about not only what's in a plan, but also, again, looking at continuous improvement and how future plans can be developed.
Thanks for that. To what extent is data sharing required for local authorities to tackle child poverty, and what lessons have been learned about its effectiveness from the provision?
So there is a great deal of there's a great advantage that can come from data sharing. There's clearly governments at all levels hold an exceptional amount of data, but we need to clearly do that in a legal and robust fashion, and that's obviously exceptionally important. I think there is a lot of good work that already goes on, both from UK government to local authorities, Scottish government to local authorities, including our public agencies. But we do need to look at how we can go further on that as well. There is clearly a question that I think we can all ask ourselves about how data could be best used to assist people. I can remember for many years having conversations with, I think, Pauline McNeill when she was on the version of this committee in the past, who was a very strong advocate of data sharing, automation, and how we are using data to quite frankly, make life easier for people to get what they're entitled to. We've seen continuous improvement in that, but there is still more work that can be done on that. But again, I would stress the point: it needs to be looked at robustly, and it needs to be with a firm legal setting. And I can appreciate that is often exceptionally frustrating, and it takes sometimes too long for that to happen. But the legal basis for that has to be absolutely core to any level of government as we take that forward, whether it's UK government, Scottish government or local authorities with third sector partners.
Sort of good data sharing is really key here, and we heard evidence from kind of some councils to suggest that more could be done to increase the take-up of the Scottish Child Payment with better data. Are you aware of there being potential to improve take-up here?
So we're already obviously doing a lot of work to improve take-up on the Scottish Child Payment, which is exceptionally high. We're keen, though, never to rest on our laurels, and we know if there's families out there that should be receiving it and are not, then we need to work together to tackle that. Clearly, there's work that goes on within Social Security Scotland to drive that take-up, but we're very keen to work with partners on that too. So what we always need to do as we work through that is to work out what data do people want and what are they going to do with it. That's the legal basis that we need to work out to be able to provide information sharing on that. We're already working with local authorities to see what can be done between the agency and councils to share information on the Scottish Child Payment, but we can't just give councils the information for the Scottish Child Payment. We have to have, for the legal basis for that, we have to work out why do councils want that and what are they going to do with that. Now, that might seem an obvious and quick thing. I would like it to be quicker, the agency would like it to be quicker, councils would like that to be quicker, but we do need to go through that due process. What I would give the committee the assurance on is that we are all very keen to see what could be done to be able to use the data as effectively and efficiently as possible. But for fear of boring the committee again, to talking about the legal basis for that is absolutely integral to what we do.
Thank you. And obviously, you know, the kind of qualifying benefits for the Scottish Child Payment are reserved. Does this suggest the use of the DWP data is really the problem?
So that would give different information to local authorities. It would give more detailed information, depending on, again, what they wanted and how they would use it. So there is much more information obviously held by the DWP and HMRC. Again, they must work on a legal basis for this as well. And this goes to the legal gateway that needs to be created under the Digital Economy Act 2017, and we have used that, and we have worked with local authorities in the past, for example, to get further information on those eligible 2-year-olds for ELC. That took a great deal of time to be set up, and that's no criticism of the UK government to that on this. For the previous UK government, that was just a simple fact about how that had to come into force through regulations. So it can be a long and protracted process, which is exceptionally frustrating for everybody involved. So I don't think it's the fault of the government. It's a necessity of the system that we have, both at UK and therefore at Scottish levels. But again, it would be up for local authorities to decide what information they want, and then determine who has that, whether it's the UK government or the Scottish government, how they would wish to use that, and then would have to go through the legal processes for that.
Thank you. And one final question. The announcement, obviously, in our budget yesterday that we scrapped the two-child policy in Scotland has been widely welcomed across the country. It is clear, obviously, we'll require that access to DWP data. And there's a kind of worry that it might not be given the sort of priority by the DWP that it needs. And obviously time is of the essence, obviously. Do you share that concern?
I'm not at the point of having a concern, because I think we need to take the UK government at its word that they are also wishing to take action to tackle child poverty. Clearly, the quickest way, cleanest way for this to be done would be for the UK government to scrap the two-child cap. But if they don't do that, then I am keen to work together to see what's the quickest way that we could have that data in place. I wouldn't point to it being a concern at this point, because those discussions are at very early stages. We have a good working relationship under both previous and current UK governments on the devolution of social security, and I hope those relationships will allow the governments to work together. I appreciate there is a great deal of work that goes into the DWP, and the devolution of benefits is but one part of that. So they will have other priorities for work that's getting done on their systems, which is a matter of fact that it's obviously an exceptionally large and complex system. So we will have to have a discussion about how that is prioritised. But I hope, given the fact that there is that UK government task force, that those discussions will be fruitful, and I'll of course keep Parliament updated. That's one of the reasons why the work in the next financial year, for which we've just set the budget, is exceptionally important, because that is what will build the system to allow us to be able to deliver it. And that's why the work that's going to go on in the next financial year is vital. And the quicker we can get that work done, the quicker we can deliver the mitigation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Back to yourself, Convener.
Okay, thank you. I'm now going to invite Bob Doris in for a supplementary, and can I just remind Bob to be as concise as possible? Thank you.
I'll try my best, Convener. First question is a really brief one. Martin Booth from Glasgow City Council said he thought up to 25% of children in Glasgow that should be getting the Scottish Child payment is not. Is that a figure that the Cabinet Secretary would recognise?
So the estimate for the Scottish Child payment in Glasgow that the Scottish Government works to for 23-24 is 89%. That's produced given rigorous analytical processes within the Government. But clearly I have noted what's been said by Glasgow City Council. Officials will reach out and work with the Council to see why we have that discrepancy, because that's important that we get to the bottom of that. In essence, even if it's the higher 89%, Scottish Government figure, that still leaves too many families that do not have access to a payment that they're entitled to. And it's important, as we think within that Scottish Child Payment take-up, that there may be particular parts of there may be particular families that aren't accessing the support that they're entitled to. I remember actually last week, perhaps, Paul O'Kane asked me a question about ethnic minority families, and I think that's an important example of maybe how we can, even with high take-up, need to work on particular priority family groups, whether it's for the Scottish Child Payment or elsewhere. So hopefully that reassures Mr Doris that we believe the take-up is higher, but regardless, we're keen to work with the Council to understand where the figure came from and, regardless, in essence, how we can improve it.
Yeah. I would also just note that I would quite like to have a line of sight on those discussions with Glasgow City Council as a constituency MSP in Glasgow with significant poverty in his constituency. So I'd be quite keen to be kept up to date in relation to that. I would also note that Mr Booth spoke about data sharing issue with both DWP and Social Security Scotland as being one of the barriers. But my final supplementary question would be automation in Glasgow is something that the local authority tries very hard on. So the school clothing grant, for example, council tax and housing benefit data is used to automate that by and large, but because of different qualifying criteria for free school meals and educational maintenance allowance, those are two things that can't really be automated. Has the Scottish Government thought about standardising or aligning qualifying criteria to allow maximising and automating uptake on some of these really important initiatives?
Well, clearly we keep criteria under review. In the last year, for example, we saw a change to the criteria of Best Start Foods. From memory, I think we saw an additional 20,000 pregnant women and young children being brought into eligibility. Part of the reason for that was to be able to look at the 5 family payments that we have, the Scottish Child Payment, Best Start Foods and the Best Start grants in a more joined up way, and that allows further automation. So we already now automate the Best Start grants payments, for example. You don't need to apply for them separately if you're on the Scottish Child Payment. So those are the types of that's the type of work that we're already undertaking within Social Security Scotland. Clearly, any changes to eligibility either mean we have to increase the eligibility, which needs to be a decision that we go through as part of the budget process, and I'm sure Mr Doris wouldn't want us to see restrictions in eligibility just so that they're all the same. So on that basis, that needs to be undertaken as part of the budget process. Now, we can have automation or we can have the sharing of data so that even if eligibility is different, we can use data to still be able to support the ease of a person's journey from one qualifying benefit to another. So there are different ways of looking at it, and certainly what we have done within the reasonably short lifestyle of social security is increased automation and increased data sharing to be able to assist with both of those.
Thank you, Convener.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm now going to invite Paul O'Kane in, who's joining us also online. So over to you, Paul. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Convener. With your indulgence, Convener, I'll just start with a brief supplementary to Marie McNair's last line of questioning. So the Cabinet Secretary has touched on her policy announcement on the 2-child limit. I'm just keen to understand that. I feel committee will have a chance to discuss this in more length, particularly when we scrutinise the budget process. But just for clarity, because it would be helpful, and Cabinet Secretary mentioned the speed with which she wants to act, the interaction with DWP, the need for data, and indeed the Child Poverty Task Force that's working at UK level. And she and I have discussed the 2-child limit in the context of that work. So it would be helpful for me to understand just when was the decision taken to make this announcement. I understand a week and a day ago it was put into the budget document, and that the Scottish Fiscal Commission didn't actually have time to either cost or analyse it. So it would be helpful to understand that, given the speed with which the Cabinet Secretary appears to want to act on it.
So clearly the timing that took place with the Scottish Fiscal Commission has been laid out by the Fiscal Commission itself, and I note their remarks on that. The discussion about the two-child cap has clearly been something which has been on the mind of the government for some time. Our policy position has been exceptionally clear for many years that we believe that this should be taken away at source. We had hoped that that would happen with a change of government. It did not, and therefore in the run-up to the budget this year, clearly discussions happened within government about how that could be done, and Mr O'Kane will be aware of when we told the Fiscal Commission about that.
So just for clarity, the decision in government was taken a week and a day ago?
For clarity, the Scottish Fiscal Commission has laid out when it was told about that, and again I would be happy to give further information and talk further about that when I appear before the committee to discuss the budget.
So you're not able to say, Cabinet Secretary, when you took the decision?
The decision was taken following discussions within government and was part of the budget that was announced yesterday.
Okay, I'm sure we'll look forward to further discussion on that, Convener. If I will just move to my substantive questions, which are on statistics and data within the Child Poverty Act, and I know that colleagues will want to cover some of this as well. Cabinet Secretary in her opening, I think, and in response to other questions, covered the Scottish Child Payment. And she'll know that I've been, for some time, talking about the need for data of the impact and effect of this, and I think everyone shares that view. She spoke about the government's modelling. Is she content that the modelling is in a place that will help us to understand the impact? We know that various versions have been used, suggesting 100,000 children lifted out of poverty. Actually, I think that's more about children being kept out of poverty. Obviously, modelling works on a projection of a number of different issues and the different things that the government do or that other governments do. For example, the uprating of benefits at a UK level as well. So does the Cabinet Secretary believe there's more work we need to do to understand fully the impact that the child payment is having, and obviously the child payment being something that's supported across the Parliament?
So I think there is a distinction to be made around modelling of impact, which clearly is modelling what we estimate can be achieved by any policy, and I do believe that that is a robust analysis which has gone through. The Scottish Child Payment alone is estimated to keep 60,000 children out of relative poverty in 24-25, but we will then have to wait until we have the 24-25 statistics to be able to see what the actual poverty rates are. So clearly there's modelling which goes on about the impact that we believe from our analysis the policies will have. And then we clearly have a time lag to then see what the actual data is for child poverty. But I'm certainly satisfied that the figures that are produced through modelling estimates are based, yes, on a range of assumptions, but that is a robust and a transparent process that's gone through to allow the government to be able to model the impact of the policies that we have, and that's important that we carry out that modelling work to allow us to look at the impact of policies that we will undertake and what the difference will have. So we're not seeing, for example, the full impact of the Scottish Child Payment on the poverty levels that have already came out. Because that is still working its way through the data set, so it's making a difference on the ground, but we haven't seen the publication of the data that will allow us to be able to determine what poverty levels are in 24-25. So at this point, we have the modelling to be able to estimate how many children will be kept out of poverty because of those measures, the Scottish Child Payment being just one of them.
Thank you very much for that. We've also spoken in committee about how we actually estimate, I suppose, and look at those levels of poverty, and then can look at actions on a range of levels, as you've spoken about this morning. We know there are some challenges in terms of the Family Resources Survey, and I think that's true across a number of the nations and regions of the UK, and we've seen interaction with the DWP in other parts of the UK to try and get more detail, I suppose, and we've seen that happen on a local level actually in Glasgow, where we've been able to have ward level data. So it would be good just to understand from the Cabinet Secretary, your engagement with DWP to try and drill down into some of that data on a more localised level.
I'll certainly try, Convener, if Mr O'Kane will bear with me for again.
I feel like this has been the story this week. I've been jinxing the Cabinet Secretary every time we've debated.
Yeah, if Mr O'Kane will just keep talking, sometimes it's helpful.
Not something I have trouble with, Cabinet Secretary.
Right, so there is a challenge that we all have to make sure that we have the correct data in front of us to be able to look at impact. The committee, I know, has taken evidence and has looked at the importance of data in previous inquiries. We are working actively with the DWP on this issue. The Scottish Government has been paying for a 100% boost to the Family Resources Survey Scottish sample since 2002 to try and improve that work. Sample sizes are being affected by falling response rates for many large population surveys, and that's not just to do with the FRS but wider. But we are looking to see what can be done to mitigate that. Analysts within government, Scottish Government, are also working with the DWP on an ongoing basis since the Scottish Child Payment was included in the FRS questionnaire, and we're again working quite closely with the DWP to ensure receipt of the Scottish Child Payment is accurately reflected in the data for 23-24 for eligible households. So there is work that is ongoing about improving the quality of the FRS data. Not just Scottish Government, but as Mr O'Kane suggests, we are all keen to make sure that that data is as robust as possible. And I hope I can give him some reassurance that there is active and ongoing consideration on this issue.
No, I think that's helpful, and certainly something I think committee would be keen to follow up on. I wonder if I can just finally on the local data, and Mr Doris, I think, has touched on this, and particularly in terms of the Glasgow and what's happening in Glasgow, there's been quite effective in identifying gaps, I suppose, particularly in uptake of different social security payments. But I wonder what more support can be given to local areas to really improve their data sets, I suppose, and I wonder what work potentially through COSLA might be done to support local authorities in that regard.
So the data source for the statistics on the statutory targets can't be disaggregated at a local level, but there are there is other work that can be undertaken, and clearly the Scottish Government's been working with the National Partners Group to look at the range of data that's available. The Scottish Household Survey provides local authority breakdowns. DWP, HMRC, children in low income families data is also a valuable resource. But there's also the work that is being undertaken through the Child Poverty Practice Accelerator Fund to look at how data could be used more effectively, and what data indeed could be used as part of that process. So that Scottish Government fund is also assisting various local authorities to look at different data sets and models to see again how they can bring that together. And clearly it goes back to the point which members have raised earlier on about the need then for that good practice to be shared across local authorities.
Again, I think something the committee may be keen to follow up and return to. I'm very grateful, Convener.
Okay, thanks very much, Paul. I'm now going to invite Liz Smith in for a supplementary. Thanks.
Thank you, Convener. When it came to the previous two panels, it was pretty convincing evidence of how successful the Scottish Child Payment has been, and they provided sufficient qualitative and quantitative evidence as to why that is the case, notwithstanding some of the issues that Mr Doris raised about a few missing out on the uptake. What I'm interested in, Cabinet Secretary, is when you come to measure the effectiveness of different policies and the modelling that you're obviously undertaking, what criteria are you using to establish when a policy is successful? Because you indicated in your opening remarks this morning that you feel there are lessons to be learned from how successful the Scottish Child Payment has been. What are these lessons, and what information criteria are you using to try to establish which other aspects, whether that's to do with housing or whether it's to do with closing the attainment gap in schools or free school meals? What are you actually doing to measure the effectiveness of policy making?
Well, clearly a policy can have more than one outcome that we're wishing to achieve from that. But if we can give an example of some of the work within the child poverty plans, one of the areas where we're very keen to look at is, for example, how many children can be lifted out of poverty by a particular measure. And that's where the modelling comes in. Now, that is not an exact science, because clearly you can model about what the impact of that policy is, but when you get to actually the data sets about poverty levels, there's a myriad of different other things that have also impacted on that family. So direct correlations about policies are hard to track, but what we can do is use the analysis that we have through modelling and then the data to actually see how many children could be lifted out of poverty for a particular one. The other wee caveat I will give to that, if Liz Smith will forgive me, is also some of that takes longer than others. So the Scottish Child Payment has in effect an immediate impact in that it immediately goes into someone's pocket. The impact of spend on employability, for example, or early learning childcare, undoubtedly assists in us tackling child poverty, but it's not an immediate impact where you can trace it. So we clearly then, on those basis, look at the evidence which has been built up not just here but internationally about the best ways to tackle child poverty, and that was why we had a review very recently of the measures that were in the Best Start Bright Futures to sense check whether they were still the right measures to drive child poverty. So I hope that kind of explains.
It's a very complex area. I fully understand that, and you're quite right about the time differences. You know, some policies will take much longer. What I'm interested in is the fact that some of the witnesses flagged up the fact that there are still gaps in the data that we require to be able to undertake this successfully. And I just wondered if that's something you agree with. Are there gaps in data that you would like to have as a Scottish Government to be able to more effectively measure what's being successful and what's not successful? And if there are gaps, could you just indicate to the committee what they might be?
I think some of the challenges around data gaps would be around, for some of the 6 priority groups because some of the numbers of that are so small. So that is sometimes difficult then to then trace that through in a particular policy area about the impact if the number of ethnic minority families that are using employability that then go on to employment and what impact that has on poverty. There's a number of steps on that from quite a small subset of the population. So those are some of the challenges that we have. The other aspect is around intersectionality. And that's clearly an area which the National Advisory Council for Women and Girls is very keen that the government continues to do more on, and they're quite right to challenge us on that, because again that comes down to the challenges. People do not live in the simple silos that government may wish to have them on, so we can just have our very clear data sets. Life's not like that. We all know that, and that's again an additional layer of challenge that we need to put on ourselves, and that is a piece of work in progress. The National Advisory Council are quite right that we still need to do more on intersectionality.
Right, again, that's very helpful. I mean, I do think when it comes to working out how effective we are at targeting those most in need, where the Scottish Government's resources should be placed, it's absolutely essential that we can drill down on just how effective the modelling and the policy making can be, so that we are assessing the results in terms of that success. And therefore, I would argue that the Scottish Government's resources can be better placed and targeted at those areas where we feel that we can make the greatest difference. Is that something you accept?
So I think we're back onto what is genuinely, I think, a very useful discussion about universality versus targeting, and there's a myriad of different layers to that, which presumably the convener is not going to allow me to get into today. But I think it is something that's exceptionally important, because targeting of resources is important. There's also a principle for some aspects around universality that needs to be taken into account, but that's perhaps for a wider debate. The aspects around the impact of policies on different people is key, though, regardless of, in essence, where you are on targeting versus universal services. And that is where the importance of the modelling and the importance of the analysis comes into it. It's important, obviously, that there's not just the Scottish Government work on this. There's also work taken forward by the GRF and many others, which we also challenge ourselves within government to make sure that any information that's been gathered about that, where people do believe that something should be done differently, is a policy discussion that needs to be aired.
GRF have done fantastic work on this. I mean, I think the common theme that was coming through all the witnesses over the last two panels was that we need to have this evidence base. It's no good just to, Scottish Government deciding on a different priority, or any government, not just the Scottish Government, deciding on any priorities, unless there is a good quality evidence base to what is working most effectively in terms of, in this case, bringing children out of poverty, and ensuring that the resources, which are obviously extremely scarce at the moment, are targeted at those most in need. And I think, Cabinet Secretary, you're accepting that. Yeah,
I mean, I think that's exactly why that a review was undertaken of Best Start, Bright Futures, that sense check of actually what's in the policy programme was undertaken. So it wasn't just we did the work to do the delivery plan, which obviously we're now starting to undertake for the next delivery plan, and then we just left it. But we did that review to again check in with the best evidence available to be able to analyse that. Another important aspect, obviously, in all this is around evaluation and the monitoring of policies that are already in place as well. But that's the importance of not just publishing the plan, but sense checking that, whether it's through monitoring, evaluation or review.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm now going to invite Jeremy in. Thank you.
I'll let you take a moment. Yeah, unfortunately my question is very short, but actually really important. And that is, what should happen if we miss the targets?
Really wishing I brought the cough sweets to the committee this morning. Well, I will absolutely start by saying that we do not intend to miss the targets for this. I think it is very important that the government has a continued focus on that, and we've talked about that. We've talked about that through the session today. We are absolutely fully committed to those targets, both interim and final. And I hope Mr Balfour would see that indeed within the budget that was published yesterday. And that was exactly why the decision was taken around the two-child cap, around the investment in breakfast clubs and so on. Clearly, the delivery of targets isn't for government alone. There are layers to this, and the fact that there are events that can make this more or less challenging for the Scottish Government is something I'm very conscious with, but we're very, very keen to further restate the fact that we are very keen to meet those targets, and we believe that we will.
I appreciate that, and I welcome the optimism of the Cabinet Secretary. However, there is quite a lot of data out there from the third sector who say we may not meet those targets. So, without trying to be Mr. Scrooge and pessimistic, if for whatever reason we don't, what would be the outcome?
So the Act itself doesn't include any specific enforcement provisions if one of the targets is not met. That's how the Act was passed. But I would go back to the fact that I know that stakeholders are very keen to press us to pick up the pace on our delivery of the poverty targets. I believe that the budget that was set out yesterday does that, although we'll have further discussions on the budget, I'm sure, in the new year. But that is something that we are very, very keen to restate is our absolute determination to meet those targets.
Thank you, Convener.
I'm conscious of the fact that you're struggling, Cabinet Secretary, so you'll be delighted to know this is the very last question, and then we can let you go. Thanks.
Also been delighted to know it might be quite a long question. So, good morning, Cabinet Secretary. The Child Poverty Act doesn't exist or operate in isolation. And since 2017, we've had COVID, we've had war in Ukraine, we've had cost of living crisis, which has pushed up rents, has pushed up mortgages, has resulted in high inflation, including food inflation, and high energy costs. So I'm keen to understand, well, not only that, we've had 5 Prime Ministers in 7 years, some with different priorities. So I'm keen to understand, how do you develop effective approaches to tackling child poverty when you're not in control of all these different factors?
Well, that does present an additional layer of challenge, it would be fair to say. We knew that when the Act was passed, that we did not have control over the aspects, for example, over 85% of the social security system, and none of us could have foreseen at that time the other events which Mr MacDonald has raised that have buffeted all of us throughout the UK, and that has presented additional challenges. I do believe that the work that's been undertaken by the Government has demonstrably made a difference, and it's not just the Scottish Government that has said that, but stakeholders have also pointed to the fact that child poverty is lower in Scotland because of the work that's been undertaken by the Scottish Government, but it still remains far too high, and we need to focus our mind on that. I think there's a major test for the new UK Government on this area. They have set up a task force to look at that. That is welcome. A task force needs to come up with conclusions, recommendations, and then move on to actual implementation. If, for example, the UK Government would take heed of the work that's been done by the End Child Poverty Coalition, that's looked at the ask of the UK Government to also have legally binding goals on child poverty, and also to take action on, for example, the two-child cap and fundamental reform, you would then get two governments working in the same space. So there is a real opportunity for that to happen. My understanding is the UK task force will report early in the new year, and I had a number of meetings with UK government ministers on that. To talk about what's happening in Scotland, talk about what we wish to happen in Scotland, and I await that report with a great deal of interest, but I suppose more importantly so will those living in poverty.
So the task force you said was reporting earlier in 2026. Is that before you have to publish your final draft delivery plan? In March 26?
It will report next year.
Right.
Report next year in 25. So we will already be undertaking our work for how we approach our next child poverty delivery plan at that stage. So they will overlap, and it will allow us to, I suppose, have a better idea about what we need to do up here, and how much support will actually and change will happen elsewhere, and that remains to be seen.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I appreciate that you were getting hoarse there and struggling, so thanks very much for joining us along with your officials today, and we will obviously report on our findings in the new year. So this concludes our public business for today, and we'll now move into private to consider the remaining items on the agenda. Thank you.